perhaps, just perhaps, there is some hope for a Livingston side who are very much struggling to stay afloat in the choppy waters of the relegation zone.
Well, Tyrone, looking back to the start of the season, I've done a bit of research here. You can commend me later, but the sides met right at the start of the season. There was 0-0 at Livingston. Is there anything to suggest in your mind that supporters might see something different tonight?
I think Livingston have not had too bad a record against Aberdeen in recent years, so I guess irrespective of their recent form, just having those kind of positive memories, I would have thought will give the Livingston fans some cause for optimism. From an Aberdeen point of view, despite the fact that there's been a number of games where you can argue that they haven't really performed, there have been a few, mostly it has to be said on the European stage, where they have performed. They've looked really good against some really, really top sides, and I think the Aberdeen fans will be hoping, they need to see, or wanting to see, a lot more of that, and if they can see a lot more of that, they will feel that there's no reason why they can't start beating these teams and start climbing back up the Premiership table.
Alright, Tyrone, you've got me in the mood. Keep up to date with Tyrone and indeed the events of Match on ScotsTOUN. That's from 7. Thanks, Tyrone.
David, thanks very much. I'll see you in your festive jumper in an hour's time. Can't wait for that. The time is 4:40 and you're listening to Drive Time with Lucy White. And Donald Trump has been disqualified from contesting the 2024 presidential election in the US state of Colorado. The justices there ruled Mr. Trump engaged in insurrection. Let's speak now to Niall Stanage from the political newspaper The Hill. He's joining us now from Washington. Niall, this is all surrounding the events of January 6th in 2021.
Yes, that's correct. The Colorado Supreme Court ruling that Mr. Trump's actions around that time do indeed qualify as engaging in insurrection. That appears to be banned by the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution. And so they say, basically, he is ineligible for office, and therefore it would be, in their words, a wrongful act to put him on the ballot for the Republican primary, which takes place in March in Colorado.
So, this is about primaries then, but is there an indication then that it will actually impact him going forward if he was to become the candidate?
Not really, although
Right.
It's a somewhat complicated question. Basically, here we're talking about the state of Colorado. Trump is going to appeal it immediately to the Supreme Court, which has a conservative majority. So that result could be overturned. Even if it is not, this ruling is a Colorado-specific ruling. The danger to Trump would be legal challenges in other states ending up in the same result, which would then obviously have a very serious impact on his ultimate chances.
Now, there have been other states, though, that have knocked this back, haven't there?
There have, that's right. Michigan, New Hampshire, Minnesota have all knocked it back under different rationales, to be fair. But I mean, I think this was always seen as a bit of a long shot, not because anyone is in a big rush to defend Mr. Trump's conduct around January the 6th, but because there are obvious concerns raised when a court makes a decision as to who can be a candidate, rather than the candidates, going forward and the voters making a decision.
So is this likely to hold him back at all, do you think?
And not really. In fact, in the Republican primary, it might ultimately help him. And I know that sounds bizarre, perhaps especially outside the United States, but he has, as you're well aware, been indicted 4 times in the past year. And as those indictments have rolled in, his polling lead in the Republican primary has doubled. So that shows the extent to which Republican voters are tending to rally around him. Obviously, the broader electorate for a general election would be different.
Yes, and his base seems to see these as actions of the state against him in some way.
Yes, I mean, he's certainly sort of portraying it as people out to get him. This is an attempt by the Biden administration or by Democrats or by liberals to hobble him, to do him in when he is leading the Republican primary polls by such a wide margin.
Okay, well now, thanks very much as always, Niall Stanage, political newspaper The Hill, speaking to us from Washington. Now, hopefully most of you listening will have your presents already wrapped up and safely under the tree, but for many of us, I say us because it's myself included, with just a few days left until Christmas, it means a bit of a mad dash to the shops to pick up whatever you can get. And sometimes It can be awkward not knowing what to get someone, and it can lead to some pretty tricky conversations with loved ones. I mentioned this a bit earlier, but our colleague here on Drive Time, Gerald, is about to explain when he had to open some early presents from his parents.
So I went back home last week to visit my friends and family for Christmas because I won't be able to be there for the actual date. I told my parents that I didn't want any Christmas presents this year for a number of reasons, but mainly because I wouldn't be able to fit them into my bag coming back to Scotland. Anyway, I went and saw my parents, had a great time, and of course they got me a couple of gifts. I headed back to Belfast where I was staying and realised I wasn't going to be able to fit these into my bag because of the way they were wrapped, so I had to open them early, let my mum know that I had opened her presents, and she asked me, what did I think of them? And I had this awkward moment where I was like, did I tell my mum how I really feel, or did I lie to her? Bit of context here, the stuff that my mum had got me were a couple of t-shirts and a jumper. They're fine. My mum knows that my style is minimalist, and I think she tried to match that and maybe just missed the mark a little bit. The clothes that she got me, they're fine. There's a Palm Angels t-shirt and a Mary jumper. I think both of them might be knockoff ones. I'm not totally sure, and I don't think my mum would have realised that at the time either whenever she was getting them. I had a bit of a back and forth, and I decided I'm just going to be honest with her. I was grateful for the gifts, but they're not really my style. Anyway, a few days passed, and I noticed my mum wasn't really getting back to me. She was kind of ignoring some of my messages, and I got the sense that maybe I had annoyed her. So I caught up with her yesterday just to check in, just to see how she was, and she actually thought that I was annoyed at her. That's why she was being quiet with her responses, or not responding at all. So I assured her I wasn't annoyed at her, and I was very grateful for the gifts. They're just not something I am going to wear. So we had a bit of a laugh about it, and we're all fine. But it just kind of goes to show you this idea that if you don't have a conversation with someone beforehand, or if someone's determined to buy you clothes are tricky. It's tricky to know what people's styles are and what people are going to like. It's such a personal thing. I mean, it's one of these situations. Are you completely honest about things, or do you sugarcoat it ever so slightly? Me and my mother's relationship is fine. We haven't fallen out over this, and I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this story on air.
So, if you ever wondered what gets talked about in our drive time meetings, you've basically just sat in on one there, because this is the kind of stuff we've been talking about. It's what we were talking about today. That's why we thought we'd broaden out the conversation, because it can be awkward, can't it, if you get a present that you're not entirely happy with. Let's speak to Elaine Macri, who's a personal shopper in Stirling, and also to the budget mum blogger Samantha Thomas. Elaine and Samantha, I hope you managed to follow along okay with that saga.
Yes.
Yeah. But Elaine, to you first, have you got any tips for anyone who's in a situation like Gerald? They get a gift and they really don't like it. What do they do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the person who's buying should always listen, like his mother should have done, I suppose, in the nicest possible way, and especially someone younger than yourself. I think if you are given a gift, it is a tricky one. Like, he obviously has a good relationship with his mum, but, not everybody does. So what happens is a lot of these gifts end up going to charity or repackaged for someone else, So I always think you're safer doing vouchers or experiences, where somebody has a broad choice.
Yeah, I want to come back to vouchers in just a minute, but Samantha, to you first. I don't know how you feel about that particular situation. It's difficult, isn't it? Because one of the things about Christmas is if you get a gift you don't want, it can just end up being a bit of waste, really.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I have a little cupboard that I keep to one side, which has presents either that I've bought myself throughout the year, or ones that have been gifted to me, and that are just not my taste, or I might think, oh, actually that doesn't suit me, but it might suit somebody else. So I put them all to one side, so that sort of helps me come nearer to Christmas or birthdays and things later on in the year, and I can perhaps redistribute them elsewhere, or even if, in charity shops, like you say, if people, our local communities are in need, I'll donate them there then, so at least they're getting some use.
Yeah. Elaine, I wanted to come back to you on vouchers, because I'm a big fan of a voucher, but some people think it shows a lack of effort.
I know, and yeah, I find, for example, my own kids, they would much prefer that. But then you could get them something small, you know, that you're sure they're going to use, like, you know, just a nice bath set or something, just as a token. But I think it's risky spending money on someone when you're not sure. And like Gerard said, the clothes thing, it's very personal, and even fit and size can be a risk.
That's another thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Samantha, I count myself amongst these people here, but people will have a little bit of last minute shopping to do, I'm sure, over the next few days. Does it become harder to stick to a budget when the pressure is on?
I think it's harder, full stop, given the circumstances that we're all kind of in, given budgets and things like the pressure that everyone does. Even if you say, I don't want presents, like your guest earlier, you do kind of feel caught up into the whole scenario. But I think if you look around and you sort of use a little bit of creativity, it is possible to still have, be able to gift. It doesn't have to be a physical present. It could be, I always think it's a really nice thing to gift your time, just a voucher to say, let's spend some time together towards the end of January when everything's calmed down. Maybe just go for a drink or catch up with a friend for a meal or something like that. That way you're getting that time, you're getting that, that bit extra, more nice things to do. It feels like Christmas feels a bit more extended because it's not as all in one go where it can feel quite fraught, and it doesn't have to be expensive then. It can be sort of on your terms as well.
Elaine, have you ever been given a present that you just absolutely hated?
Yeah, funny enough it was when I was a teenager. Funny enough it was clothes. I remember my favourite auntie gave me this checky shirt, but it just wasn't my colour, and I think my mum managed to exchange it. But what I was going to say is, for example, if you're buying someone clothes, always put a gift receipt in, because I wonder if Jared had that, would he then have needed to tell his mum? I mean, obviously there was a problem with the luggage, but
there's an awkward situation, isn't there, when they say, "Oh, are you going to wear that new top?" and you think, "Oh no, because I don't have it anymore." It's so difficult, isn't it? Samantha, you were giving us some really useful tips there for last minute shopping. I wonder, from your point of view, Elaine, just briefly, if you don't mind, a couple of days left to go, people will be stressing out ever so slightly. Any top tips from you?
Yeah, I think a man buying for, say, a partner or someone special, especially a lady, you can't really go wrong with nice perfumes and things. And these ladies or people working in these counters are usually very helpful, and they'll wrap them up for you. So that saves that side of it for speed. But remember that we've missed the last post was actually today. So also what I must say is that a lot of the sales have started as well, actually.
So you might actually be in luck.
A bargain hunter, yeah. I mean, even some of the jewellery shops, really. I think men are much more practical, and I think it's a lot easier to buy a man a last-minute gift. Children, I think parents appreciate games and things, like good old-fashioned games.
Absolutely, not more toys. That's a whole other discussion for another day. Listen, thank you both so much for coming on. Great sports, Elaine Macri, personal shopper in Stirling, and Budget Mum UK blogger Samantha Thomas. It is bang on 5 o'clock, and you're listening to Drive Time tonight with Lucy White. Still to come, the government announces a new timescale for the dualling of the A9.
By the end of 2030, we anticipate that nearly 50% of the A9 will be will be open as dual carriageway, rising to 85% by the end of 2033, and eventually 100% by the end of 2035.
That's 10 years after it was originally planned, at a cost of £2.4 billion. It's a route that carries around 10% of Scotland's GDP in terms of cargo, and it serves 35% of Scotland's land mass. We'll get reaction from campaigners and from the political opposition. Also tonight, the Scottish Government won't contest the UK Government's veto on its gender reform bill for trans people.
I think many people watching this would have seen that this legislation process was fundamentally flawed, and I would even go as far as to say that the Scottish Government misled Parliament.
That was the Alba MSP Ash Regan speaking to us earlier. We will talk about an amber weather warning that's in place tomorrow. We'll find out about how that could potentially impact travel, and we'll try to find out how many of us actually have COVID this festive season. Let's start again with the very latest news with Nina.
Thank you, Lucy. Work to dual the A9 between Inverness and Perth will be completed by 2035. 10 years later than originally planned. The Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Mary McCallan, told the Scottish Parliament that a new procurement approach will mean that from next year there will be a rolling programme to complete the remaining sections, totalling around 77 miles at a cost of around £3.7 billion. Scottish ministers have confirmed they will abandon their legal challenge against a UK government veto of gender recognition reforms. Social Justice Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville said the Scottish government would instead focus on improving transgender healthcare. The Court of Session ruled earlier this month that the block on the gender self-ID reforms was legal. The Scottish government had until the end of the month to appeal. Our political correspondent Phil Sim told us more.
There's a whole sort of constitutional side to this, because I think if this was just a question of that Section 35 power, this veto, they might want to fight on. They don't want to accept the principle of that, but at the same time they don't want to leave trans people feeling like that they are right in the middle of a big constitutional shoving match.
Two 16-year-olds have been told to expect life sentences after being found guilty of murdering Brianna G. She was stabbed 28 times with a hunting knife after being lured to a park near Warrington in February this year. Messages between the boy and girl who carried out the attack detailed their fascination with murder, torture and death. Prosecutors said the level of planning and violence was beyond belief. Detective Chief Superintendent Mike Evans from Cheshire Police said the case had been shocking.
I don't think any of us have ever seen the level of depravity shown and the dehumanising nature of the text messages between the two, and the hatred towards Brianna and others for no reason whatsoever, and just that thirst for kill. That was really disturbing, and we still do not know to this day why they've done it, what sort of led them to want to do it.
The Office for National Statistics has said that falling petrol prices were behind the surprise drop in inflation. The rate last month was 3.9%, down from 4.6% in the year to October. City analysts believe the data may lead the Bank of England to cut interest rates sooner than expected. All schools across Shetland are closed tomorrow. Storm force winds are forecast across the north of Scotland from early morning, with winds expected to gust up to 80 miles an hour across the islands. Ferry sailings to and from Shetland are leaving early today to avoid the worst of the weather. To travel now, the M8 heading towards Glasgow is blocked. That's eastbound at junction 25 Cardonal. That's because of an accident. And there is heavy traffic because of an earlier accident on the M8 westbound in North Lanarkshire at junction 5 Shotts. And the weather tonight will see further wet and increasingly very windy weather developing, persistent and increasingly heavy in the west and northwest as a cold front edges down from the northwest. A Met Office countrywide yellow warning will come into force from midnight and run right through Thursday. Overnight lows 8 to 10 Celsius in the south, 5 to 8 in the north. And that's BBC Radio Scotland News.
Nina, thank you very much. David's back with more sport a little bit later on at this hour. We'll be at Ibrox as Rangers return to Premiership action after lifting the VIP Cup on Sunday. They're at home to St Johnstone, who are unbeaten in their last 3 matches, but a win for Rangers will narrow Celtic's lead at the top of the league to 2 points. David is here talking through all of that just after 5:30. But now the time is 5:05, drive time tonight with Lucy White. And the Scottish Government has set a new target of 2035 to complete the dualling of the A9 between Inverness and Perth. The Transport Secretary, Mary McCallan, told the Scottish Parliament there would be a rolling programme to upgrade the remaining sections of the road, and that the government was committed to making it safer.
Following the tragic loss of life that occurred on the route, in particular in 2022, we've been investing an additional approximate £5 million, and I'm pleased to confirm that those safety measures are progressing at pace with a number of elements completed, and of course these include enhancements to signing and road markings, emphasis at junctions and those vital transitions between dual and single carriageways. And as with the rest of the trunk road network, Presiding Officer, the safety performance of the A9 will continue to be regularly reviewed. Time is against me, but to conclude, this government is restating its commitment today to dualling the A9 between Perth and Inverness, and we're doing that with a concrete plan. The approach that I have set out means that the Highlands can have confidence that the considerable benefits of the A9 dualling programme will be delivered and in full. Now that we have reached this point, Presiding Officer, there will be no let-up. When construction starts on Tomatin Tamoy next year, under this delivery programme, It will roll continually until the route between Perth and Inverness is fully dualled.
Laura Hansler is from the A9 Dual Action Group. Hi, Laura. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Just your reaction then to this statement from Mary McCallan.
I think on the surface it sounds fantastic, and nobody's going to detract from that, least of all me. I think the one thing that I most welcome is the change in this procurement procedure, which was a major part of the petition. So the 3 sections north are going over onto a hybrid plan, and the remaining 5 sections south are going on to the kind of Welsh Government sort of project base, which is a MIM as they call it. So I really do welcome that.
I just wonder, for those that aren't, you're obviously very, you know what all of this language means, and I don't want you to spend too long explaining it, but people would wonder why that would make such a difference. So can you explain that to us?
I think what it does is we will get more trust from the construction industry. Before, they were basically working with a kind of 2% profit margin there, right, and that could so easily be lost. And they also took the full risk of burden on the industry, so there was no safety net really for them there. So this is a major change here for them. So I'm hoping that actually brings trust back for the construction industry, and it attracts more bids into the further remaining sections.
So you're happy about that? And I'm sorry I interrupted you. What were you going to go on to say?
I think, if we scratch further beneath the surface, the things that concern me are the time frames. And I think, anybody looking at that, will have questions. They are saying that by 2030, they're kind of saying they'll have another 44 miles dualled, because there is 88 miles still to dual. Now that's on the back of only 11 miles being dualled in 16 years, so we have to bear that in mind. That is critical that we do bear this in mind.
And that you don't think it can be done?
I think, as she said, and I think to coin a nice Scottish term, we need to go hammer for tongs on this. And really, I asked during the petition for, to be the dualling to happen sequentially and consecutively, and I think that they must proceed in such manner to have any hope in getting that much road. And some of the road that is remaining to be dualled is very complex. So, as she said herself, Mary McCallan said herself, they can't let up in this at all.
Was there any suggestion that they would happen concurrently?
Briefly, I've still to scrutinise the actual transcript myself, because obviously I've come in and out of interviews all day.
Of course.
So I want to scrutinise her exact words, but she did touch on it momentarily.
In terms of the announcement in general there, so you're happy about learning about changes to the procurement process. You're a bit nervous about the timeline. When we look at just how long this has been going on for, how significant do you think today will be?
I think, as I said, we've got to be cautious, and I think everybody in the Highlands and Islands has got to be cautious about this. Mary was very correct in saying this is a spinal route for Scotland. It is the backbone for us, and we deserve a safe road in which to carry out our daily lives, to have our emergency services working on, to get our supplies up and down as well with transportation. But I think we have to be very cautious with these timetables. I'm going to go out and scrutinise each section and their plans for each section and what dates they have put forward for these sections, and then see how industry actually takes this announcement too. I think that's very essential too.
Okay. Well, Laura, I'm really grateful for you taking the time to chat to me. As you say, you've had a really busy afternoon. Laura Hansler from the A9 Dual Action Group. Listening to that was the Conservative MSP Murdo Fraser. Worth pointing out, we did actually ask the Transport Secretary Mary McCallan to come onto the programme, but she couldn't do it. Murdo, what do you make of this timeline that's been set out by the Scottish Government?
Well, any progress is welcome, and I would agree with everything that Laura has said. And I know Laura well; she's a very doughty campaigner and has done excellent work in recent times to put this on the agenda. But we have been here before. Alec Neil, the former Infrastructure Secretary, gave evidence to the Parliament's Petitions Committee that back in 2013, when he was the Cabinet Secretary in that role, he had a concrete plan at that point to see the dualling completed by 2025. So while I think proposing dates for the future is welcome. Let's actually see some concrete progress being made rather than just promises. And it was back in, I think it was February this year, that we had a statement to Parliament in relation to the next section to be dualled, which is the Tomatin to Moy section just south of Inverness, and we were told that there'd be an announcement by the end of the year. Well, here we are. This is the second last sitting day of Parliament, and we've been told that there's no contract in place for that, and the best we can be offered is an expectation there'll be a contract award in summer next year. So, it's good as far as it goes, but I'd be a bit more comfortable if we had a little bit more confidence that things would actually be happening.
And Laura was making the point, though, that there's been a lot of change in the procurement process, and that a lot of time seems to have gone into working out the best way to do that. Would you accept that it's better to get all their ducks in a row, as it were, for something like that first before launching into things?
Well, I did ask the Cabinet Secretary today what discussions she had with the contractors industry in Scotland in terms of the interest there would be in bidding for what will be a very significant construction project if they proceed. I didn't really get a very clear answer to that, because clearly there are issues within the contracting sector in terms of skills and the availability of people actually to do this work, even if the funding is in place. And again, we don't have a lot of detail on this mutual investment model that's being talked about, which is being pursued elsewhere by the Welsh Government as a form of public-private partnership. So there's a lot of detail here still to be awaited. I, along with other MSPs, have been invited to a meeting with the Minister and Transport Scotland at the end of January, and I'm hoping we'll get some more detail then, because I'm afraid every year that goes by we see more and more people dying on this road. We saw in the course of last year 12 people dying on single carriageway sections of the A9, and every year that goes by that we don't see the dualling completed, I'm afraid we're going to see more tragedies and more people losing their lives.
Okay, Conservative MSP Murdo Fraser, thanks very much for joining us. Before that, we spoke to Laura Hansler, who's from the A9 Dual Action Groups. Just coming up to 14 minutes past 5. Now let's stick to news from Holyrood. There's been quite a bit of it this afternoon, because ministers have confirmed they'll abandon their legal challenge against the UK government's veto of Holyrood's gender reform bill. The legislation was the subject of a controversial debate in Parliament and was caught up in a constitutional row after the Scottish Secretary stepped in to block it from becoming law. Social Justice Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville says the government remains committed to supporting and empowering the LGBTQI+ community, including trans people. Earlier in the programme, we got the reaction from the MSP Ash Regan. You remember she quit as Community Safety Minister last year in protest against the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. She's now left the SNP and represents the Alba Party.
This was not something that was supported by the public. The process to get to this bill was very, very unsatisfactory, and a range of voices were not heard through the process. But I think the position that the Scottish Government have now set out is a pause, if you like. So it's been blocked by the UK Government, but the Scottish Government are saying they won't withdraw the bill. Their position seems to be they're waiting for a change at Westminster, changing government, to see if it might be possible for perhaps a different government to lift that block and go on and implement the bill. I don't think they should do that. I don't think it commands the support of the public. I think this is the worst piece of legislation in the history of devolution, and the public do not support it.
Well, Vic Valentine's the manager of Scottish Trans and is in the studio with me now. Hi, Vic.
Hi.
I wanted to first of all just get your reaction to this news that the Scottish Government's not going to pursue a legal challenge here.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we're really disappointed, and the reason that we're disappointed is because the bill that was passed last year would have really significantly improved the process trans men and women can use to update the sex recorded on their birth certificates, and by not choosing to appeal the decision, unfortunately, we're stuck with the intrusive and difficult process that exists at the moment.
The Scottish Government says it's going to work to make healthcare better. It also says that part of the decision behind not pursuing this was in fact not putting trans people at the centre of a constitution, what was becoming a constitutional row. Do you accept that?
I think overall I understood what the Cabinet Secretary was saying in terms of her reasoning, and I think that if they were genuinely of the view that they were very unlikely to succeed, then a part of me can understand that maybe having to do things like this two more times over appeals would have been really difficult for people, because you have to pick yourself up to hope for some success, and then if that's not successful, you have to go again. But yeah, I think that ultimately what matters to us is that we want the bill that passed to become law, and we know now that is not going to be a reality, at least for a little while.
What do you think of them shelving it? So they're not ripping it up, as it were. They are keeping it back in the hope that a future government might give it the go-ahead. What do you think of that?
I think that is absolutely the right thing to do. Absolutely. I mean, it was passed by a large majority of our Parliament, so it's not really just the Scottish Government's bill anymore. MSPs from all parties voted for it, and I was really pleased that the Cabinet Secretary confirmed that it remains their position that it was the right thing to do, and I hope that when we have a UK government that is perhaps more minded towards doing things that improve people's equality and human rights, that they can get back to the table and have a discussion about making that happen.
It was about a year ago that this was first passed in the Scottish Parliament, and people remembered quite how contentious it was at the time. But down the line a year later, I wonder, from your experience, from others' experience that you've spoken to, I wouldn't ask you to speak for the whole community, but have people felt that this has been a damaging process on the whole, or what would you say to that?
I think that undoubtedly there has been a lot of misunderstanding and noise around discussions about the bill that have really focused on trans people's lives and our rights, and often have done that without talking to us. So it's sometimes felt a bit difficult, disempowering, like we're not in control of the situation. It's very much about us, but that we're not kind of getting to take part in. But I do remain, really strongly of the view that this law needs to change, because the process that exists for updating the sex on your birth certificate at the moment is really, really difficult, and so it was the right thing to do to try and make that happen, and ultimately, we were successful in Scotland with doing that. It's just that ultimately that's happened blocked by the UK government.
We're grateful for your time, and thank you for coming in. That's Vic Valentine, manager of Scottish Trans. You're listening to Drive Time tonight with Lucy White. The time is just coming up to 19 minutes past 5. And a mother and son who were facing eviction are being allowed to stay in their flats over Christmas. Stacey Grieve was handed a court summons in the middle of a BBC interview about Edinburgh's housing emergency last month. However, her court case is now being postponed until spring. It comes as the Finance Secretary announced significant cuts to funding new build affordable housing. Our social affairs correspondent Chris Clements visited the family as they finally put up their festive decorations.
Stacey and her 6-year-old son Archie are staying put for now. She faced a court battle as the council looked to evict her from her temporary accommodation, where she's lived 4 years. After weeks of worry, her case has been postponed until spring.
Thought Friday was the day that we were going to come into court and find out, right, this is what's going to happen. You're out before Christmas. If I can just sit back and wait, and that's the worrying part, because they can just come to your door, tell you that you've got to move, put you in that state of fear, that state of worry, and then nothing. But I'm still up here, if that makes sense. I dropped one, so I get on the light, so it makes that one last.
This is an ex-council property owned by a private landlord and rented back to Edinburgh Council as a homeless flat. The landlord wants to take it back, meaning she'll have to move again after 9 years on the housing list.
Give Mummy a call and look after yourself. Thank you.
No, thanks for your time, Stacey.
Sorry, sir. Thank you. This is some just gave me my court letter.
We first met Stacey last month as the council declared a housing emergency in the city. The same day she was given her court summons.
It was a blotter. It still is kind of a blotter. I felt like my whole inside slid, but I felt like my whole body just was on the floor.
Since then, Glasgow has declared the housing emergency, while other councils could follow suit next year. Meanwhile, Stacey was invited to meet Scotland's Housing Minister to discuss her own experiences of the system. Here's Housing Minister Paul McLennan.
I think there was always a number of parties who obviously officials discussed this with Edinburgh Council, Shelter, for example, who advocated for it as well to try and see what we could do. Look at our own about the history of the case and see what we can do going forward.
What can the government do to alleviate the fears that the pressures the councils are under?
Yeah, I mean, the housing emergency itself doesn't bring forward any actions, so there's nothing actually.
So it's a pointless exercise?
No, I'm not saying it's a pointless exercise. I think one of the key things in terms of that is what actions do we take. And as soon as I was appointed Housing Minister, I spoke to local authorities, the key local authorities, Edinburgh, Glasgow, North Lanarkshire, Fife and others in terms of delivery. Edinburgh, for example, had 1,500 empty homes at the moment, so what can we do to work with Edinburgh? So we're trying to move forward with other charities in the sector. How can we make sure we get these empty homes made available again so people get in there? So it's not underestimating the challenge in any way, shape or form, but it's making sure we're speaking to local authorities and trying to get solutions that suit them.
Stacey has been offered 4 properties in the last 6 weeks, but they were either unsuitable or out with Archie School catchment area. She said she was only offered those properties after she appeared on the BBC. The council says it's continuing to support her to find a suitable home.
I just feel like what I'm doing is never good enough. It's never giving me the answers, it's never getting us in the right directions. I just feel like I'm not going to give Archie that settlement that he needs to.
Stacey's situation is not unique. She and Archie are one of 5,000 households living in homeless accommodation in Scotland's capital. They'll spend Christmas here, but their journey to a permanent home is far from over.
That's our social affairs correspondent Chris Clements. Well, meanwhile, charities and industry bodies have criticised a nearly £200 million cut to the budget for delivering social housing. The Scottish Government announced the 26% reduction in funding for the Affordable Housing Supply Programme in its budget yesterday. It said Scotland's facing the most challenging settlement since devolution. Let's speak to Alison Water now, who's from the housing charity Shelter. Hi, Alison.
Hi.
Why is this cut going to have such an impact, do you think?
I mean, we at Shelter Scotland absolutely understand that the politics is about choices, but the budget cuts announced yesterday are choices by the Scottish Government to allow homelessness to rise, to allow more children to be stuck in miserable temporary accommodation for even longer periods of time. And I very much agree with Chris's comments there. It's hugely sad for Stacey to be in that situation. But the very sad fact is that Stacey's story is very far from unique, and I think it's awful that Stacey has been made to feel the problem. It's not people that are the problem. We've got a broken housing system, and the cuts yesterday are condemning thousands of more families like Stacey's to be stuck for longer and longer periods of time in temporary accommodation. The average length of time in temporary accommodation for a couple with children is already 347 days. That's almost a year, and over 1,900 children are stuck in temporary accommodation for over a year. These figures are going to get worse and worse because of the choices that ministers made yesterday.
And like you say, the Scottish Government does have to make choices, and as I mentioned, it says it's facing the most challenging budget settlement since devolution. It's blaming inflation and the autumn statement, and also labour shortages and supply chain issues caused by Brexit. So it's saying it's a sort of perfect storm that's led them to this situation.
And we absolutely understand at Shelter Scotland that this is an incredibly tough time financially for the Scottish Government. But if there's money for council tax freezes, then there should be money for homelessness services. If there's money to build bigger and better roads, there should be money to build more social homes. It is the Scottish Government that makes these decisions about how much money is spent on ending the housing emergency. And I would argue that they've got these decisions very badly wrong based on what we heard yesterday. This is accepting that the housing emergency in Scotland is only now set to get so much worse.
Talk us through the figures then. £200 million cut to the budget for delivering social housing. What kind of an impact could that have?
What we know about families like Stacey who are stuck in temporary accommodation is that it's social homes that families move on to in the vast majority of cases. And what we're seeing is a building bottleneck in temporary accommodation, quite simply because there aren't enough social homes for people to move on to. Now, we know from the latest statistics from Scottish Government about the Affordable Housing Supply Programme that it's frankly stuck in the slow lane. And I think the danger is that now that this level of cut has been announced, that the Housing Supply Programme, and Sally Thomas from the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations said this morning, I think it's now become an impossible dream. So exactly at the point where we need to go faster and further on driving up the supply of social homes, the Scottish Government is committed to putting that programme right into reverse gear.
Okay, well, Alison, thank you very much for your time this evening. That's Alison Water from the housing charity Shelter. Now, 2 16-year-olds have been told to expect life sentences after being found guilty of murdering Brianna G. She was stabbed 28 times with a hunting knife after being lured to a park near Warrington in February this year. Prosecutors said the level of planning and violence was beyond belief. Our reporter Nick Garnett was outside Manchester Crown Court after the conviction.
When you look at what this was, 2 15-year-old children luring a 16-year-old into a park. Brianna thought that she was going to just meet one friend at the bus stop when she'd travelled from her home. She got off to find 2 people there. She didn't think anything more of it. She wasn't a suspicious person in that respect, and she went with them willingly for the afternoon. It was a February afternoon at a weekend, and she went for a walk through a park with them and was brutally murdered, stabbed 28 times with a hunting knife. An absolutely horrific crime. Now, the jury was out for 4 hours and 40 minutes. It's been a 3-week-long trial in which both the defendants, X and Y as they're known, because they are not allowed to be named because of their age, they both gave evidence in the case. And they basically blamed each other. They both admitted that they were there. They both admitted that they had been having what they described as a fantasy. They said that they'd been sending messages talking about the desire to kill someone purely as some type of twisted fantasy. But they carried out with that fantasy. They went through with it all. And that has been the really disturbing part of this case.